My name's Rainy Campus, and today I'll be talking about chapters 1 through 4 of the book Dust by Carolyn Steedman. She's a British historian specializing in social and cultural history of modern Britain. Jacques Derrida, who didn't write this book, but she talks heavily about his writings of archive fever within the 4 chapters. He's a French-born philosopher. In the acknowledgments, it's pretty typical, but she does state that she's not going to go easy on Derrida like some AHR anonymous reviewers had suggested, so you know she's going to be very bold with her statements. In the preface, she does say what she means when she talks about archives, and for her archives are state institutions or quasi-institutions since the 18th century in England and France. In chapter 1, she discusses that Derrida uses a lot of Freudian within his talking of what an archive is and what it stands for. And she uses an example on page 6 and says, he reiterated here, to want to make an archive in the first place is to want to repeat. And one of Freud's clearest lessons was that compulsion to repeat is the drive towards death. And later she goes on to explain exactly how an archive is not like a human. And she kind of tears into his thinkings with the whole Freudian thing. And then she also states that Derrida thinks archives are an expression of state power. And essentially, these 4 chapters is her trying to show you that it's not really that. Chapter 2, something she called a fever, Michelet, Derrida, and dust. She starts really light with a hotel analogy about dust, and it darkens pretty quickly when she talks about what archive fever actually is and why dust is behind it. Archive fever is due to dust, which is actually anthrax in the 1800s. And when the books would deteriorate or documents would deteriorate, it would have little crumbles of dust, and that was anthrax, and people would breathe it in and become sick and die. And she adds really random things like a story of Hester, and that's where she gets something called a fever. It was actually written in Hester's diary about another woman. And she goes on to say that sheep's blood was used as glue, a lot of things that you don't necessarily need. Chapter 3 is the magistrates, and she declares that archives fever's Akron is the wrong magistrate because they use power that they don't have, where actual magistrates in the late 1700s and 1800s hear stories and document them even though they can't do anything, and they don't technically go over and use powers that they can't use or don't have. In chapter 4, the space of memory in an archive, she says what an archive is and why archive fever is wrong about archives. She says that Derrida using Freud is a problem. Archives is not very much like human memory and is not at all like the unconscious mind. It is consciously put together from past documents and mad fragments no one intended to preserve. She goes on tangents about Michelet and what and how historians felt in and about an archive, which is just unnecessary in my opinion. So my final thoughts and reviews, it's a little preachy, and also it really tears into archive fever, but it never tells you that he's a philosopher, so it explains a lot of why he's talking the way he's talking. And then the Society of American Archivists actually has a review on this book, and this is the first paragraph of the review, and I think it pretty much states it as good as you can get. Before you sit down to read Dust, I strongly suggest you pour yourself a tall glass of your favorite liquid refreshment, take a few cleansing breaths, and do whatever else might serve you as a routine for instilling calmness, because this book will test you. Thank you. That is my presentation on the first 4 chapters.